Hello and welcome to the live that is specifically for the next pattern release by Zanette Knits, and that is the Song of the Moon sweater and the one that I'm wearing. Thank you so much for joining. I will be going through all the things about the pattern. That includes the inspiration, the gauge and yarns and techniques used and construction, as well as some other notes and modifications. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'll do my best to follow along and read them out and answer them as they come. The inspiration is my Latvian heritage, and you can see here the sign of the moon is arranged in a kind of a cross formation, and I believe it's called the moon cross or a variation of. There's many variations, but it's all about the moon. And so I've featured that quite dominantly here, and is surrounded by something that looks like a very traditional folk percussion instrument that you sort of tap on your don't know what these called, fists. You sort of hold it in one hand and sort of tap it, and it creates a very chimey sound. This melodic aspect of the chart, together with this moon symbol, gave away to the name Song of the Moon. So that's the inspiration part. Let me talk about the gauge and yarn next. So this is quite a fingering weight project. So it's quite a small gauge, and it's very summery. So you would have 30 stitches in 10 centimeters. That's also for 4 inches stitchwise, and the row gauge is 36 rows in 10 centimeters or 4 inches. So it's quite an intricate piece of work, but it's not the worst. It also allows for a lot of for sort of a big stitch count repeat, which creates that striking and intricate look. The yarn that I'm using is really fabulous yarn from Yama Yarns in South Africa, and it's a merino and linen singles, and it is the softest ever. Like, the whole time I was working on this project, I just couldn't get over how amazing it felt to hold it and work on it. And I'm using 4 colorways. So the main color is called, bear with me, it's called Stone, and it's one main color, but there are 3 in a sort of gradient arrangement contrast colors, and the top one is called contrast color 1, called Coffee Bean. Contrast color 2 is called Hibiscus, and in the middle here you see the 3rd contrast color called Grapefruit. I will touch upon the success, a formula for a hopefully successful color arrangement, because it's not always straightforward when multiple colors are involved. So I'll talk through the approach for that in a moment as well. I've already touched upon that in some of my previous reels, but I think this will be a good refresher since the pattern's coming out tomorrow, and you might be thinking about making one yourself, hopefully. There isn't a gotcha about the yarn, that I would suggest you really go for the suggested recommended yarn, which is a superwash merino linen or a merino silk singles, because the reason being this sweater project benefits from a drapey yarn because there's quite a lot of increases in the yoke to begin with. If the yarn doesn't drape well and it holds a shape like really woolly and airy yarns would, then there's a risk, there is a risk that you could notice some, what are they called, waves or yeah, some puckering could be more visible. But if you have drapey yarn, then any formation just collapses and sits on your chest or back, and none of that is visible. So I didn't notice this effect for me because this yarn was so amazing in hiding any imperfections like that. And then there were some test knitters who experienced this effect and were sort of worried about what they've done wrong, but it's not the knitters, it is the chart that works better with drapey yarns. And but should you have woolly airy yarn that you want to use for this project, there is a way to fix that, and the suggestion would be to go a size down than maybe what you were considering. And also instead of working, there is some shaping here in the neckband itself, just work a normal neckband so that it gives a little bit more stretch to this the starting line here, and that way it minimizes the puckering. So these are some things that you might consider when choosing the yarn. Right, the techniques used, there's not much. The floats are reasonably short for this project in comparison to some of my other colorwork projects, so it could be a good beginner one. It's very rewarding because it's really nice to see it grow. Yeah, hi everybody who's saying hi on the chat there, and thank you for joining. There isn't much complexity in terms of techniques. There is, however, a couple of neckband options, and they involve decreases, and some of those decreases require you to have ambition to learn or have familiarity with a central double decrease. I'll just say that, but it's nothing too complex. There is a link to a video and a definition for how to work that. It also suggests to use tubular bind off around the cuff and hems and the neckband, but that's not a showstopper. If that's not your thing, you can just use any bind off. And of course there's a bit of short row shaping at the back to raise it, so short rows would be a good idea to know. Knitting in the round, and yeah, stranded color work. That's basically it technique-wise. In terms of construction, it's yet another top-down round yoke sweater that you start at the base of the neckband, and I choose to use the long tail cast on so that I would have a sturdy base for it and it wouldn't stretch too much. But the pattern suggests you can use any preferred cast on, and so if you prefer a provisional cast on, go for it. I have some objections for provisional cast on after having used it in quite a few projects before, in that it takes me much longer to cast on using provisional cast on, and also takes me much longer to unpick the stitches one by one than just picking up stitches from a long tail cast on. So it's a personal preference, but yeah, use whatever you like. And then what you do is just work down the yoke with increases as indicated in the chart. You separate the sleeves and body, and you work things down to hem. And then the pattern offers you some options. An option is to either fill the body with color work as well, or leave it plain, and the same goes for sleeves. You could just have the sleeves plain, or introduce a little bit of color work and corrugated ribbing. I'll show that here as well. So that's an effect. There's yardage requirements for both options, the plain one and the one with color work. And the final bit is, well, why it's final, you could choose to do it earlier if you want, but adding the neckband after the yoke is done, because there is basically the pattern suggests two different neckband options, but there's also a third one, which I mentioned earlier. The third one's just picking up stitches and not working any decreases in case you wanted a wider neckline. But if you want a closer neckline, there is actually two ways to work the decreases. I had started with an asymmetric decrease line around, and then I reworked it to have it more symmetrical, and that's the one that I've stuck with. But the pattern offers both, and there's a photo of both, so when you work at it, you can choose the one that goes the best with your mood and the color combination, or however you feel. So that's the construction. Now a few other things that are worth noting. I already mentioned the importance of the yarn choice and the neckline options and the color work options. There were a few that had short sleeve. There were a few test knitters who made short sleeve versions, and those are really cute as well. And I guess the last, whatever modification you fancy, you could make it easily longer or shorter. I chose to stop, and that's what the pattern describes, the color work of the body part after the big moon section. But if you wanted a longer one or making a dress, you could continue and mirror the top part at the bottom and go on forever. It would be nice to see a dress of this sweater. It's quite a intricate and delicate pattern, and I love it for that reason. Now a little bit more about how to assemble colors to get the best mix that shows the pattern off the most. So rule number one, in my opinion, would be to pick a neutral base that's either really light or really dark, depending on which mood you go with. And then it will be easier to, thank you, my nail polish. It's an accident that it matches so nicely, this sweater. So yeah, where was I? It will be easier to find the contrast colors that have that you can vary, but they still maintain a good enough contrast against the main color to really show off all the intricate things that are going on here. And the most intricate is probably the first and the last section, which is why I would suggest to pick your contrast colors that are sort of forming a gradient. Like in here, I'm going from dark brown to dark red and then a bit of orange accent. And in my view, I see it as a gradient. And then if you are on a light background, light main color, I would put the darkest one of the gradient as the first one, then the middle one, and finish with the lightest one, because this is where you have the smallest section, and with the least amount of intricacy, you can get away with really subtle contrast. So the direction of the gradient remains the same. So this is darker than that, and that is darker than this. I hope that makes sense. So yeah, and I think that it would be really beneficial if the colors that, specifically the second and the third color, are quite close. So because this moon cross is one whole shape, so if you introduce a very highly contrasting color from the one that's already used, then it will distort and create a different shape and have a different look. But that's of course also an option, and if in doubt you could just take the body chart and swatch and see what happens. If you are having trouble picking colors, then a very reasonable option would be to pick a main color of your choosing, and then pair it with a gradient yarn, or a yarn that's already changing colors, and then you remove yourself from making the decisions about how they change and just leave it up to destiny. And I'm sure that it would work really well as long as the main color is neutral. Then you let the pattern colors to really play out as however they do, and it will still look great. As I mentioned, this pattern is coming out tomorrow, and if you are a newsletter subscriber, watch out for the email with your exclusive discount code, and that will also contain a new test call, so maybe there's some motivation for some of you who aren't subscribers to subscribe, and we'll share some other news there. But that's about it. I'm really looking forward to tomorrow, where I can share this with you and show off the test knitter work, which I hope will be all over Instagram tomorrow as well, and look forward to seeing new versions of it pop up around there. Thanks again for Yama Yarn for generous contribution in the form of this amazing yarn. I really look forward to another opportunity to work with your yarns and your colors. It's been an absolute bliss, and I'm sort of sad that it's finished. But too many more projects of this sort. So thank you so much for joining, and I will be in touch soon.